Welcome to Daughters of the Great Migration, a new podcast series.
I'm Felecia Studstill, your host.
And I'm Heather Buchanan, your other host. Each episode of Daughters of the Great Migration shares stories about you, about us, about our community. All the stories we've heard passed down through our families and things that have happened to us as their descendants.
We continue to look forward to hearing from you, our community. At the end of each show, we'll list the ways you can get in touch with us and share your stories on the air. It's all about community and connection.
Let's hop back on that train right now. Just yesterday, I heard that Juneteenth had become a national or federal holiday. Wow.
Wow, indeed. This is a share from Texas to the rest of the United States. Now, most people I know who attended HBCUs, the historically Black colleges and universities, have known about Juneteenth for a long time. There was a running joke that it's going to change a lot when it becomes national. So we'll see how that works out. I'm looking forward to the
Yes.
mattress sale, I guess.
Yes. Yes.
But as a friend mentioned yesterday that he didn't learn until 5 o'clock that he had the next day off as a national holiday, and someone else mentioned they'd heard at noon, and someone else mentioned they'd heard the night before. I teased that that's how the actual Juneteenth came to be.
Goodness, yes. Yes.
The Emancipation Proclamation was signed at the beginning of January of 1863. A lot of slave owners, particularly as the North started progressing through the South, started moving their slaves out of the way of the Union Army because they did not want the slaves to learn about freedom. So they began to move west. At one point, it was rumored, and the number may still be underestimated, that upwards of 150,000 slaves were moved into Texas from Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and all the neighboring states. There's a reliable count of about 50,000 for certain. And a Confederate general actually made mention in a couple of letters of over 150,000 coming from Mississippi and Arkansas alone.
Wow. That boggles the mind.
It absolutely boggles the mind. A writer from Great Britain who was traveling to write about Gettysburg, coming from Mexico, and actually traveled through the area, talked about seeing just groups of people running slaves to the West so that they would not hear of freedom. So and some plantation owners from the East, particularly Louisiana, just abandoned their plantations when the Union Army was coming and moved with their slaves and families to Texas.
Oh, my goodness.
In the 1860 count, there were about 169,000 bondsmen listed in the state of Texas. By the 1870 census, there were recorded 250,000 Black people.
Wow.
Just in that 10-year period of time.
Oh, my.
And the move actually started even before the Emancipation Proclamation. So they were seeing people coming in from 1862, in some cases earlier, as people heard wind of the coming war.
Oh, goodness. That early.
That early.
That much movement of people.
That much movement of people. And so that at the time they called them refugee slaves.
Yes, yes.
Which is a little different because there was also a slave trail, slaves moving from the tobacco plantations on the East Coast to the cotton plantations in the Deep South.
Yeah, that's a little known fact, and it's interesting. I wonder what the transition, was like, Oh, my.
So, on June 19th, 1865, the Union General Gordon Granger and about 2,000 federal Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, to take possession of the state and enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. So, this general order number 3, the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness, either there nor elsewhere.
That's all. That's all I could point out. Idleness.
The first time,
Idleness after all the work we were doing.
exactly,
Idleness.
your
Okay.
first day off.
Yeah. Report for work.
Right.
Yeah. That sounds about right. Oh goodness. Yeah, I think about it's amazing. My sister has it's a famous painting, and I'm sorry that I don't recall the painter's name, but it's of the Juneteenth, the moment of a officer reading, the right, and then the enslaved people just falling down crying, like hearing this upon hearing it the first time, but then the irony of us as the contemporary viewer knowing that they found out later, a
Exactly.
year or so later in a lot of cases. So
They did. And even with Juneteenth, some masters didn't free their slaves until that December. They were trying to fight the ratification of the 13th Amendment,
yes,
hoping that they could slow down uh, emancipation. And so it wasn't really until the 13th Amendment was ratified that
yes.
all slaves were free. And that was about 3 years after the Emancipation Proclamation.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, the lengths that they went to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thank you so very much for these facts. There's still so much to learn. I didn't even hear about it until about maybe 20 years ago. And it was amazing to learn about all of this. So thank you for sharing those details.
Oh, you're
Yeah.
welcome.
So,
It's much to learn.
oh yes, and it's ongoing.
Yes.
So, well, in honor of Juneteenth, I'll share a very, very short poem I wrote back in 2001. It was originally published in a book called The Spirit in the Words. It was an anthology sponsored by what was then known as Daimler Chrysler. Who remembers that in Detroit? How does time fly? And I entitled it Juneteenth. And this updated version is titled Juneteenth Revisited. The day the cotton picking sack fell to earth and scattered 250 years of dust, we took flight with broken wings, just strong enough to reach new skies.
Beautiful.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, well, because I wrote it when I first started hearing about Juneteenth, and it was a very life changing time to hear that information.
Oh, that's wonderful. So when we come back, I'll share my own thoughts about Juneteenth.
This podcast is sponsored by Daughters of the Great Migration, LLC.
Thank you, and welcome back to Daughters of the Great Migration. On this episode, we're talking about Juneteenth. And I first learned about this, as I mentioned, when I was at school from fellow classmates who came over from Texas. And what struck me about it was how information flowed and how important our oral stories are.
Yes, yes,
There is so much of our history, of our lives and our ancestors' lives that was never written down,
yes,
that wasn't publicly available or widely distributed. So many stories that were isolated. And, I think of Juneteenth, I think of Tulsa, I think of Rosewood,
yes,
and, not always tragedies, but just how important it is that we share the the stories and experiences of our ancestors so that our stories don't get lost just because other people won't tell them.
Yes. Yes. So very well said. And that's the message. That's the message.
And so that is what Juneteenth said to me,
Yes.
because other people might not tell you.
No. And yes, it's sometimes it's on you to tell that story, don't let others tell your story.
Right.
Yes.
Great. So with that in mind, I would encourage you to share your stories with us. You can contact us through Facebook, Daughters of the Great Migration, where you'll see links that will allow you to record, upload, or type in a story to share with us. And you can also contact us through direct message. We want to hear from you, our community.
Okay. This was Daughters of the Great Migration. We look forward to hearing from you on our next episode. Remember, be a part of the story.